There are nights in the emergency room that blur together. Broken bones, heart attacks, the familiar rhythm of crisis and repair. They pile up in memory like identical charts in a stack, faceless and interchangeable. But every ER doctor has one case they never forget. One case that breaks through the noise and leaves its mark, not on the medical record, but on the soul. For me, that case came on a storm-soaked night I still dream about. A man no one could identify was wheeled through our doors, half dead, his body carved with symbols I'd never seen in any textbook. His vitals defied logic. Our machines betrayed us, and my team and I were dragged into something no training could prepare us for. I've treated gunshot wounds, overdoses, even patients who've come back from the brink of death. But this man, he wasn't like the others. The longer he stayed, the less our science explained. And when he finally spoke, his words weren't a plea for help or a cry of pain. They were a warning. This is the story of the patient who should not have lived. The case that medicine could never explain. The night that still haunts me. The ER is never quiet. People think it calms down after midnight, that the waiting rooms are empty, that the chaos simmers into something manageable. They're wrong. Midnight is when the city changes its face. That's when the drunk drivers come crashing in, when the knives come out in dark alleys, when the desperate parents rush in with feverish children, their voices trembling with exhaustion and fear. It's when the city's shadows come alive, and all of them, every broken soul and battered body, end up under our buzzing fluorescent lights. I'd been on shift since noon, and the hours had blurred into each other. At some point, I stopped checking the clock. All that mattered was the next patient, the next order, the next moment where someone's life was balancing on a thread I might be able to hold together with stitches, drugs, or sheer force of will. That night was no different. Or at least, it didn't start out different. The ER was full. Monitors beeped in chaotic rhythm, each one screaming for attention. I heard the flat drone of a heart monitor in room 4, a high-pitched alarm from the oxygen tank in 6, and somewhere down the hall, a mother sobbing. The smell of antiseptic couldn't cover the scent of iron and sweat that clung to every surface. "Doctor, we've got another one incoming," said Rosa, one of the senior nurses. She looked as tired as I felt, strands of hair escaping from the tight bun at the back of her head. Her eyes had that hollow look, the kind only ER staff carried, eyes that had seen too much, too fast, too often. "What do we have?" I asked, tugging off a pair of bloody gloves and tossing them into the bin. Male, early 20s. Found unconscious. Vitals are strange. She hesitated. Rosa never hesitated. Strange how? She shook her head. EMS couldn't explain. Cold to the touch. But his pulse was strong. No signs of trauma. Pupils unresponsive. They said he muttered something in the ambulance. But she trailed off. I waited, but she didn't finish. Her lips pressed into a thin line, as though saying it out loud might make it too real. I sighed and rubbed my temples. Fine. Prep a bed. We'll see what's going on. I'd been in the ER long enough to know that strange usually meant either drugs or a misread. People thought we saw miracles and monsters here, but in truth, there was almost always a medical explanation. Almost always. As I walked down the hallway, I glanced into the rooms I passed. Room 3, a teenage boy, his arm bent at a grotesque angle after falling off his skateboard. His father was pale, holding his son's good hand while we waited for ortho to arrive. Room 6, a woman in her 50s, strapped to a bed, screaming obscenities at the nurses, her pupils wide as dinner plates. Meth, most likely. Room 9, a frail old man with oxygen tubes in his nose, his wife sitting vigil by his side, clutching his hand as if her touch alone could anchor him to this world. I saw these stories every night, flickering like film reels across my shift, each patient a scene, each room its own tragedy. But what I didn't know then was that somewhere between the crying child and the overdosing addict, A story was about to begin that would follow me for the rest of my life. The double doors swung open and the paramedics rolled in. The patient was on the gurney, pale as chalk, lips faintly blue, eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, but the monitor clip to his finger displayed something I'd never seen before. BP 110/70, pulse 72, all sat 96%. The paramedic rattled off, though his voice carried unease. "But Doc, feel his skin." I reached out, pressing my fingers against the man's wrist, a strong radial pulse. But his skin, Jesus, it was cold. Not just cool, not clammy, cold, like touching marble. I asked. The paramedic shook his head. "That's the thing. Core temp is normal, 98.4. I frowned. "Impossible. Tell me about it," he muttered. We wheeled the patient into room 7. Rosa and an intern, Malik, moved quickly to hook him up to our monitors. The machine beeped to life, printing out vitals. Normal. Every number normal. Except the body in front of me looked anything but. He couldn't have been older than 25. Lean, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair plastered to his forehead. His clothes were torn, as if he'd been dragged across rough ground, but there were no external injuries, no bleeding, no fractures. I leaned over, shining a light into his eyes. His pupils didn't react, fixed, yet he was breathing. His heart was beating. "What the hell?" I whispered. "Doctor." Malik's voice trembled. He pointed to the man's forearm. That's when I saw it, a series of shallow scars, not accidental. Symbols carved into his skin. They weren't letters or numbers I recognized, but something geometric, almost ritualistic. Old, deliberate. Rosa muttered something under her breath. A prayer, maybe. I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "We'll run talks, blood work, CT scan, everything. I want to know what's going on inside him." Malik nodded quickly, but his eyes never left those scars. As the machine's whirred, I felt something in the pit of my stomach. A weight. I'd seen overdoses, shootings, stabbings, strokes, seizures, crashes, things that would keep most people up at night. But this man? He was different. He carried something with him, something I couldn't name yet, but I felt it seep into the room like a draft of icy air. And though I didn't know it at the time, that was the moment the haunting began. The first thing I noticed after the gurney settled in room 7 was how the air felt heavier. It sounds ridiculous to say a room can change its weight, but anyone who's spent years in an ER knows that some patients bring more than their bodies with them. Some bring silence, some bring chaos. This young man, he brought something I can only describe as pressure, like the atmosphere thickened the moment he crossed the threshold. "Let's get him on the monitor," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, my chest tightened. Rosa clipped leads to his chest, her gloved hands trembling just slightly. Malik fumbled with the EKG pads, his nervousness showing. The monitor lit up. A steady sinus rhythm, clean waves across the screen. Heart rate 72, saturation normal. Textbook, but when I placed my stethoscope to his chest, the sound was off. There was the lub-dub of a healthy heart, but beneath it, almost layered in between, was something else, a faint echo. I froze, the stethoscope pressed against his ribcage. It was there, faint but undeniable. Not a murmur, not an arrhythmia, an echo. 2 hearts were trying to beat inside one chest. I pulled the stethoscope away and masked my confusion. "Clear airway, normal rhythm," I reported. "Let's get IV access and draw labs." CBC, panel, tox screen, blood culture, the works. "Yes, doctor," Rosa replied quickly, sliding a tourniquet over his arm. The needle slipped into his vein and dark blood filled the vial. Too dark. Almost black in the fluorescent light. Malik squinted. "That can't be normal." "Could be dehydration, could be hypoxia," I said, though I didn't believe it. His oxygen saturation was perfect. There was no medical reason for blood to look like oil. As Rosa labeled the vials, the patient stirred. His lips parted, and the faintest sound escaped. Not a moan, not the broken syllables of someone regaining consciousness. "A word," whispered, deliberate. I leaned in, certain I misheard. "What did you say?" His eyes fluttered but didn't open. The whisper came again, low, raspy. "Not here." I felt Rosa's eyes on me. "Doctor, did you?" "I heard it," I said quickly, cutting her off. The patient stilled, as if the effort had drained whatever life remained in him. His skin was still cold, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I straightened. "It could be postictal confusion," I said, mostly to myself. "Patients mumble all kinds of things after seizures. Let's not jump to conclusions." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. His voice hadn't been confused. It had been intentional, a warning. The door to the room opened, and another nurse slipped in. "Doctor, someone's asking about the patient. Says she's his sister." I blinked. "Already, we don't even have his ID yet." She came in right after EMS dropped him off. Refused to wait in the lobby. The nurse hesitated, searching for the right word. "She's upset." "Bring her in," I said, though unease prickled down my spine. The woman entered moments later, clutching a coat around her shoulders. She looked maybe 30, with dark hair tangled around her face. Her eyes darted to the bed, then to me. "That's him," she said breathlessly. "You found him? We're doing everything we can," I told her. "Can you confirm his name?" Her gaze flicked to Rosa, then Malik, then back to me. She shook her head sharply. "Names don't matter. What matters is you don't let him wake up." The room went still. Even the machines seemed to quiet. "What did you just say?" I asked carefully. Her hands twisted in the fabric of her coat. "You don't understand. If he wakes up, it won't just be him. You'll bring it with him. You have to keep him under. Promise me." I exchanged a glance with Rosa, who looked horrified. Malik took a step back, his eyes wide. "Mom," I said, choosing my words slowly, "we need to treat him as a patient. He's stable for now, but—" She cut me off with a sharp laugh, brittle and joyless. "Stable? You think this is stable? You don't know what you've let into your hospital." "Why don't we step outside?" I said, trying to keep control of the room. "We'll talk privately." But before I could move, backed toward the door, her eyes locked on her brother's still form. "Don't let him wake up," she whispered again, then fled the room. "Should I stop her?" Malik asked, half reaching for the door. "No," I said quickly. "If she's family, she'll come back." But my stomach churned. Something about her urgency, the sharp edge in her voice, told me she wouldn't. We finished drawing labs and sent them to the lab. Rosa worked in silence, her jaw tight. Malik busied himself with charting, though his hand shook with every note he wrote. When the room finally quieted, I stood by the bedside, studying the patient's face. His features were peaceful now, almost serene. If not for the coldness of his skin, he could have been any other young man sleeping off exhaustion. But I couldn't shake the words that had seeped into the room like smoke. "Don't let him wake up." I left the room to review scans from another patient, but even as I walked down the hall, I carried the weight of that whisper in my mind. In a hospital filled with suffering, chaos, and fear, nothing unsettled me more than what I had just seen, because it wasn't the patient who scared me. It was the way the people around him reacted. Rose's silent prayer, Malik's trembling, and that woman vanishing like a shadow after her warning. Something was wrong, and I was beginning to wonder if medicine would have anything to do with fixing it. Hospitals thrive on data. Numbers, scans, results. These are the lifelines we cling to. When you don't know what's wrong with a patient, you order more labs, more tests, more imaging. If you can measure it, you can fix it. That's the creed drilled into every physician from the first day of training. But that night, standing over the young man in room 7, I realized something that unsettled me more than any critical trauma, ever had. The numbers didn't make sense. Doctor, results from the first drawer. Rosa's voice broke me from my thoughts. She handed me the preliminary labs, fresh from the pneumatic tube. I scanned the sheet. White count normal. Hemoglobin normal. Electrolytes, kidney, liver, all normal. Nothing abnormal? I asked, disbelief creeping into my tone. Nothing. Rosa said, though her frown deepened. But you saw the blood yourself. That wasn't normal. I held the paper tighter. Ink on a page told me this was a healthy young man. My eyes told me otherwise. Run a repeat. I ordered. Full panel again. And send for coagulation studies? She nodded and left. I turned back to the bed. The patient hadn't moved since whispering those words earlier. His chest rose and fell steadily, the monitor ticking out its steady rhythm. His skin was still cold under my touch, his lips faintly blue, but the numbers glowed green as if mocking me. Heart rate 72, oxygen 96 cent, BP 100 tilly 70. Normal, normal, normal. Doctor, Malik said softly, gesturing to the patient's arm. Look at this. He'd rolled the sleeve higher, exposing more of the forearm. What I'd thought were scars earlier weren't random. They were deliberate patterns, etched shallowly into the skin, old enough to have healed into pale ridges. Circles, intersecting lines, angular shapes that didn't match any language I knew. Could be self-harm, Malik suggested weakly. People cut words. Names, psst, I said, tracing one with a gloved finger. These look designed. Malik shivered. Designed for what? I didn't answer. Rosa returned with the second set of vials. Doctor, you might want to see this. She held the tubes up. The blood inside shimmered strangely under the fluorescent light, almost iridescent. Not just dark. Shifting, as though the color couldn't settle. Get it to the lab, I said firmly, even though my mouth had gone dry. As Rosa left again, the patient stirred. His head turned slightly toward me, lips parting. I leaned closer, bracing myself for another whisper. Instead, his eyes opened. They weren't the dull, sluggish eyes of someone barely conscious. They were wide, sharp, alive, and black. Jet black, swallowing iris and sclera alike. For an instant, I froze, every rational part of my brain short, circuiting. Doctor. Malik's voice cracked. He'd seen it too. But before I could speak, the patient blinked, his eyes closed. When I forced myself to pry one open with my thumb, the pupil looked normal. Brown. Unremarkable. I saw it, Malik whispered, shaking his head. They were black. All black. Fatigue can play tricks, I said automatically, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. No, I know what I saw. I didn't argue, because I had seen it too. The intercom crackled. Dr. Alvarez, radiology is ready for your patient. I exhaled and nodded. All right, let's get him to CT. We wheeled the gurney down the hall. The hospital was quieter now, the frenzy of earlier hours thinning into the eerie calm that sometimes hit around 3 a.m. But even in that calm, I felt tension radiating from the patient, like an electrical hum only I could hear. At CT, we transferred him onto the scanner table. I explained to the techs what we needed: brain, chest, abdomen. They nodded and began the process, the machine wearing to life. Shouldn't take long, one tech said. But nothing about this patient was normal. Midway through the first scan, the machine shuddered. Lights flickered. The tech cursed and tapped at the console. Power surge, he muttered. That's weird. The rest of the hospital's fine. Reset and continue, I ordered, though unease twisted my gut. The scan resumed, but when the first images appeared, the room went silent. The brain looked wrong. Not diseased, not injured, but wrong. The structures were all there, but faint shadows overlapped them like echoes of another brain beneath the first. Artifact, the tech said, frowning. He tapped keys, adjusted settings. The shadows remained. Run chest, I said tightly. The chest images came next, and my stomach dropped. The heart appeared doubled, faint outlines of a second organ fused over the first, its shape unfamiliar, not human. The tech stepped back from the console. "Doctor, save everything." I snapped. "Burn to disk, print copies." The patient lay still, the machine circling him, unmoved, unconcerned. We finished the scans and transferred him back to the gurney. As we wheeled him toward the elevator, Malik whispered, "That wasn't possible, was it?" "No," I said flatly. "But we'll review the images again." Back in the ER, Rosa met us with the repeat labs. She looked pale. "Doctor, the labs don't match." "What do you mean?" "The first draw was normal. This one's abnormal in every way. Elevated, white count, clotting factors through the roof. Creatinine." She shook her head. "It looks like two different patients." I stared at the sheets. She wasn't exaggerating. The numbers contradicted themselves. No continuity, no logic. "Run them a third time," I said. She hesitated. "Doctor, what if?" "Run them," I repeated more harshly than I meant. She left quickly, but the weight of her unspoken words lingered. What if the problem isn't the tests? I looked at the patient again. His face was placid, his body still. But in my mind, I could still hear that whisper. "Not here." And though every instinct told me to rationalize, to compartmentalize, to cling to the data, I felt something deeper settling into my chest. Something I'd never admitted aloud before that night. Some cases don't fit into medicine. Some cases don't want to be solved. And this one felt like it was staring back at me. I've dealt with countless families in my years as an ER doctor. Grieving parents, angry sons, panicked spouses. They all share the same language of desperation, though it comes out in different forms: rage, tears, bargaining, silence. But the young woman who claimed to be this patient's sister didn't fit into any category I knew. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't bargaining. She wasn't pleading for us to save him. She was terrified, not of losing him, of him waking. It had been about 30 minutes since she'd fled the room, and I half expected she wouldn't return. But as I stepped out to review the scans again, I saw her in the hallway, leaning against the wall near the vending machines. Her coat was still clutched tightly around her, though the hospital was warm. Her eyes darted between every passing nurse as though expecting someone, or something, to follow her. When she saw me, she stiffened. "Doctor," she said, her voice low, hurried. "You need to listen to me. Please." I crossed my arms, keeping my tone professional. "Ma'am, if you are his sister, I need you to provide identification. We need to know his name, his history, any medical conditions." "No names," she snapped. "Don't write it down. Don't enter it into your system. If you do, it'll spread." I frowned. "Spread?" She glanced around, then leaned closer. "You don't understand. He's not sick the way you think. He's a vessel." My mouth went dry. "Excuse me." Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. "When he sleeps, he's himself. But if he wakes, really wakes, it won't be him anymore. It'll be what's inside him. And once that happens, you can't stop it. You can only contain it, or..." She bit her lip, stopping herself. "Or what?" I pressed. Her gaze flickered toward the ER doors. "Or it spreads to someone else." The fluorescent lights above us buzzed faintly. For a moment, I just stared at her, my mind straining to anchor her words to something rational. Vessel. Spread. It sounded like the ramblings of someone deep in psychosis. And yet there was conviction in her voice. Not the manic certainty of delusion. Something colder. Something learned through experience. "Mom," I said carefully, "we can't proceed without knowing who he is. If you really are his sister, you need to cooperate." Her hands clenched around her coat. "I warned you once. That should be enough. If you keep him alive, you'll regret it." With that, she turned and walked briskly down the hall. "Wait," I started, but she ignored me, pushing through the automatic doors and vanishing into the night. I stood there a moment, unsettled. Families beg us to save their loved ones. They don't beg us to let them die. Doctor. Rose's voice came from behind me. She had a folder in her hand. Third set of labs. I took them, scanning quickly. Again, different results. Nothing matched the previous draws. It was like I was looking at 3 different patients layered on top of each other. "Anything useful?" she asked. "No," I muttered, though the truth was worse. The more data I collected, the less sense any of it made. We walked back toward room 7 together. As we approached, I noticed something strange: 2 security guards lingering by the door. They weren't usually stationed in the ER unless we had a violent patient or a domestic dispute. "What are you 2 doing here?" I asked. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man named Lewis, looked uneasy. "We were doing rounds when we passed this room. I swear, Doc, I saw 2 people inside." I blinked. 2, he nodded. One on the bed and one standing in the corner, just for a second, then gone. Rose's face paled. "You must have mistaken the reflection." Lewis shook his head firmly. "No reflection. I know what I saw." I pushed past them and entered the room. The patient lay still, alone. The monitors beeped steadily. No shadows in the corner, no second figure. Just a silent young man who shouldn't have been alive, whose numbers didn't belong to the body I was seeing. Still, I found myself scanning the corners of the room longer than necessary before stepping closer. Malik was there, hunched over the chart. "Doctor," I tried pulling up his records from EMS. Nothing comes up. No ID, no driver's license, no address. The system says his file doesn't exist. "Impossible," I said, moving to check the terminal myself. He was right. The intake file was blank, as if the moment he was entered into the system he'd been erased. Behind me, Rosa murmured a prayer under her breath again. I wanted to snap at her, to tell her this was still a hospital, still governed by medicine and science. But my voice caught in my throat, because the truth was gnawing at me: the sister's warning, the impossible labs, the flickering scans. Something about this patient defied the rules we lived by. I leaned over him, listening to his breathing. Shallow, rhythmic. He looked almost peaceful, as though caught in a dream he refused to leave. "Who are you?" I whispered, and though his eyes stayed closed, I swore the faintest curl of a smile touched his lips. Hospitals are places of science. Every beep, every line of code in our systems, every monitor reading, it's all built to remove doubt. Machines don't panic. They don't hallucinate. They measure. They quantify. They give us the hard edges of truth that human perception sometimes misses. That's why, when the machines started failing, I knew we were in trouble. It began small. The pulse oximeter clipped to the patient's finger flickered, numbers dropping from 96% to 70% in the span of seconds. His chest rose and fell evenly. The oxygen flow was fine. I replaced the probe, reset the sensor. Instantly, the numbers corrected themselves, back to 96%. "Faulty probe," I muttered, but Rosa was already shaking her head. "I tried 3, she said. "Same thing, it drops when no one's watching." I frowned. "Machines don't do that. They do tonight." The EKG was next. For 10 minutes, it ran a steady sinus rhythm. Then suddenly, the monitor screamed. Ventricular fibrillation. I lunged for the patient, ready to start compressions, but his pulse was strong, steady, alive. I looked back at the screen. The wild, squiggled chaos of V-fib filled it, yet the patient lay calm, heart thumping under my fingers. "Check the leads," I ordered. Malik dutifully adjusted them, replaced stickers, and recalibrated. The rhythm steadied. For a while, then the alarms went off again. "Doc, the monitor's lying," Malik said nervously. "It says he's dead, but he's not." Machines don't lie, I wanted to snap, but I'd seen enough to know better. Tonight, the machines were no longer allies. They were confused like the rest of us. By 4 a.m., the strangeness had spread beyond the monitors. I was reviewing the CT scans again when a loud crash startled me. Rosa had dropped a tray of instruments in room 7. She stood frozen, staring at the IV line. "What happened?" I asked. "The saline," she whispered. I followed her gaze. The clear bag of fluid had turned cloudy, threads of black swirling inside it, curling downward into the tubing as if alive. I tore the line free, throwing the bag into the biohazard bin. My heart pounded. Contaminated fluids. No, I'd hung that bag myself. It was sterile. "Check all the IVs on this floor," I barked. Within minutes, Rosa returned, all clean. Only he was like that. I rubbed my temples, my mouth dry. This wasn't contaminated. It was targeted. The strangest part came soon after. I stood by the bedside, double-checking vitals manually. Stethoscope on his chest, strong heart, fingers on his wrist, steady pulse. But the monitor screamed flatline, no heartbeat, no activity. The screen read 0. Malik glanced between us and the patient. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "It's like his body and the machines aren't talking to each other." The words lingered. His body and the machines weren't aligned, as though the machines were reading one truth and we were feeling another. Two realities in the same space. "Doctor." Rosa's voice trembled. "Look at his skin." I turned. The symbols carved into his arm had darkened, raised against his flesh as if inked anew. They pulsed faintly, in rhythm with the monitor's false readings. "Jesus Christ!" Malik whispered, stepping back. "No," I said sharply, my own fear bleeding into irritation. "We don't jump to superstition. It could be scarring, vascular reaction, something." But even as I spoke, the symbols writhed, just slightly, like something beneath the skin was moving. That was the moment my rational armor cracked. "Rosa, dim the lights," I ordered suddenly. She hesitated, then flipped the switch. The room sank into shadow, monitors casting the only glow. And in that dimness, the patient's skin seemed almost luminous, the scars glowing faintly like embers beneath the surface. The monitor screamed again. "Flatline. Check his pulse," I barked. Rosa pressed trembling fingers to his neck. Strong, steady. I checked myself, my hand firm on his wrist. Alive. The monitor was wrong. I stared at the black screen and the glowing symbols and, for the first time in my career, admitted something I couldn't explain in the language of medicine. This wasn't just an anomaly. This was impossible. The intercom crackled suddenly, making all of us jump. Code blue. Room 12. Another patient was crashing. I tore off my gloves and sprinted down the hall, Rosa and Malik close behind. We stabilized the man in room 12, an elderly diabetic with a failing heart. Nothing unusual there, except the timing. Because when I returned to room 7, the monitors had gone silent. Not flatline, not alarm, dead. Every screen black, every wire is useless. But the patient, he was sitting up. Not fully, just halfway, propped on his elbows, eyes still closed. His lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. Rosa gasped, backing against the wall. Malik's pen clattered to the floor. I forced myself forward. "What are you saying?" His lips formed the words again, faint but clear enough this time. "You shouldn't have brought me back." Then he fell back against the bed, monitors flickering to life on their own. The steady beep of a normal heart rhythm filled the room again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Something had happened. Something we'd never be able to chart or code or bill insurance for. Something that had no place in medicine, and for the first time in years, I felt the cold grip of fear curl around my spine. The ER is never silent. Even in the rare hours between midnight and dawn, there are hums, clicks, the distant shuffle of feet, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Noise is part of the architecture. It keeps you anchored. That night when the silence came, it felt wrong. It began with a flicker. The lights dimmed, then steadied. A second flicker, longer this time, until shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Malik muttered, "Not again," under his breath. Then everything went black. The emergency generators should have kicked in. They didn't. The monitors died, the vents fell quiet, the IV pumps went mute. The silence spread, thick and suffocating. Only one sound remained, The steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor in room 7. I froze in the hallway, Rosa clutching my sleeve. "Doctor," she whispered. How is it still on?" It was impossible. No power meant no machines. But there it was, clear and rhythmic, cutting through the dark like a metronome for our fear. We pushed into the room. The monitor glowed faintly, casting pale light across the patient's body. He hadn't moved since collapsing back onto the bed earlier. His eyes were still closed. His lips no longer moved. But the symbols on his arm. God, the symbols. They were burning now, faint but undeniable, glowing like coal through paper. "Back up," I told Rosa and Malik, though my own feet refused to obey. The beeping stopped, and then his eyes opened. They weren't the dull, half-lidded stare of the sedated or comatose. They were wide, black as oil, pupils blown so large they seemed to swallow the whites. He looked directly at me, not through me, not past me, at me. My mouth went dry. "Can you hear me?" The corners of his lips curled into the faintest suggestion of a smile. His voice came out cracked, raw, but steady. "You should have let me go." Behind me, Rosa gasped. Malik whispered, "Holy God." The man sat up, fully this time. The heart monitor spiked wildly, but never cut out. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, IV lines tugging against his arm. "Don't move." I barked, instinct taking over. "Lay back down. You're not stable." He ignored me. His gaze never wavered. He slid one foot onto the cold tile floor. And then the power surged back. The lights roared to life. Machines whirred. Vents kicked on. Alarms beeped in chaos. The sudden brightness blinded me, and when my vision cleared, he was back on the bed, flat, motionless, as if he'd never moved. Rosa's hand shook violently against my arm. "Did you see?" "Yes," I said quickly. Too quickly. I saw. Malik stepped forward, pressing trembling fingers to the patient's wrist. Pulse is normal, strong. "But Doc, we can't keep him here. This isn't right." I knew he was right. But where would we send him? To psych, to ICU. No department would accept a patient who defied both medicine and electricity. I turned back to the man. His eyes were closed again. His breathing is steady. His arm, with its glowing scars, now looked ordinary once more, raised but inert. For a moment, I almost convinced myself we'd hallucinated the entire episode. Sleep deprivation, stress, suggestion. That would have been easier, cleaner. But then Rosa touched my hand, whispering so quietly I almost missed it. She was standing, Doctor. Both feet. I saw the floor move under him. I looked down. There, on the sterile white tiles beneath the bed, was a footprint. Bare, damp, pressed deep as though made by weight. The patient hadn't walked in hours. He hadn't even stood since admission. And yet, there it was. The rest of the night fractured after that. Every sound was suspect, every flicker of light a warning. Rosa refused to enter room 7 alone. Malik insisted on keeping the door cracked, as if that thin strip of hallway light could keep the impossible at bay. But I stayed. I had to. Whatever this was, medical, psychological, supernatural, it was happening under my watch. Around dawn, the storm outside eased. The building settled. Patients in other rooms stabilized. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. Until I noticed the monitors again. The patient's heart rate 60, perfectly steady, blood pressure normal, respiration unlabored. But in the corner of the screen, just beneath the vitals, words had appeared. Not numbers, not data. Words. No T, U, or PT in T. I blinked hard. The text vanished. Just green lines and numbers again. Malik, I called. My voice cracked in a way that betrayed me. He came to the bedside, glanced at the screen. "What is it?" "Nothing," I lied. "Glitch." Because how could I tell him what I'd seen? That the machine we trusted for truth was speaking. I didn't sleep that day. None of us did. Night marked the shift. Before, the patient had been a mystery. Now, he was something else entirely, an intruder. Not just into our ER, but into the very rules of medicine, of reality itself. And whether I admitted it out loud or not, I knew the truth deep in my bones. The first incident wasn't an anomaly. It was a warning. It has been years since that night. I've worked countless shifts since then. I've intubated patients in screaming chaos, cracked open chests in hallways, fought death with everything medicine can offer. I've seen miracles, and I've seen futility. That's the rhythm of emergency medicine. You save some, you lose some, you move on. But I never moved on from him. We transferred the patient to ICU once the storm broke. He lasted less than a day there. No official cause of death was ever filed beyond multi-organ failure. The paperwork reads like any other lost times, doses, procedures. Clean, clinical, sanitized. But that's not the truth. Not the whole of it. Because the night before he died, one of the ICU nurses swore she heard him whispering the same words he'd spoken to me. "You shouldn't have brought me back." I never told her I'd heard it too. I never told anyone about the symbols glowing, or the black footprints, or the monitor flashing words. Some truths don't belong in medical charts. Some truths unravel careers. Still, every so often, when I'm leaning over a patient and the monitor flickers for a second too long, my stomach knots. When the lights buzz in the middle of a storm, I feel the same cold grip on my spine. And when a trauma rolls in from the rain, soaked and broken, I see his face in every stranger. Was he a man? Was he something else? A door we forced open that should have remained shut? I don't know. All I know is this medicine is supposed to explain. Machines are supposed to measure. But that night, neither did. And years later, I still ask myself one question every time I close my eyes to sleep. What did we bring back?
Subscribe for more videos.